Hello, minions, henchmen, and future overlords and trainings. I'm sure we have seating somewhere. Tonight, we are going to talk about Shadowdark and the yet-to-be-named title, but the reasons why we like Shadowdark a lot. I'm David Moore. Normally, we say what we've been doing, but I've been too busy to think about that.
I have also been too busy to think about that, but I'm also running a Shadowdark game, as are you. So I think it has inspired us in all kinds of exciting ways. So excited that we're not even just going to do our intro. We're just going to launch right into what we're loving about Shadowdark, right?
Yeah. Ken's going to even forget to introduce himself.
But, I'm this guy named Ken. You may have heard of me once or twice on this podcast.
So as we just said, we're going to talk about Shadowdark. We've had a lot of fun with it. We've talked about it before a little bit, but these are specific things that have kind of grabbed us both mechanically and changed the way the game is played, because it is based on 5th edition D&D, but it plays so much differently because of several choices that have been made in how it's written and how the rules have just been tweaked a little bit. One of the first ones, number 1 on our d12 die of awesomeness, is old school attributes. Early D&D, you would roll 3d6 in order down the page, and hopefully that fit a class. Shadowdark does the same thing. 3d6 in order. If you don't get anything under a 14, you can re-roll. You get kind of a mulligan. There is already written in an optional rule that if you want to move the things around to fit a better character class, you can move those attributes. The strict rules, which I don't normally play by, but The initial rules in here for anyone just picking up the game is roll 3d6, write them down in order, and that's your character attributes.
So I have to ask, is this really as you wrote it? Re-roll if you get nothing under 14?
That is my understanding, yeah.
Wouldn't that be that if if you have an awesome character where all of your attributes are 14 or above, then you have to re-roll your character?
No, under a 14. Or sorry, I wrote nothing under a 14. If you have nothing over 14 or less, wow.
That's cruel,
okay,
man.
Yeah. Okay, that'll make a good short that people can yell at me at. No, you can re-roll if all of your stats are under 14. There we go.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, I can't wait to edit this and go back and go is that what he really said? I was like, you're talking, and I'm just trying to comprehend what you were saying. I'm like, wait, what? So, yes, it's been a long day, everybody. So, that is pretty cool. I haven't, in my lunchtime game, nobody's rolled up a character yet. We're just using the pre-gens in a homebrew campaign setting. So, we'll see. We had our first character death just because the guy couldn't join us for lunch for a couple of weeks. So, we decided his character froze to death. They looted his corpse.
Before you... So, wait, you're telling me he died, basically before character creation?
No, he died after the first session.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you hadn't made characters yet. So
no. We did. We're using pre-gen. So his pre-gen died.
Okay.
Right. So yes,
Gotcha.
I have one character death, which was just plot death, really, because he just he had a lunchtime meeting that was starting at 12:30 every Tuesday for the next couple of weeks, and it's like, okay, well, he's like, maybe I'll just come back later. I'm like, yeah, you can do that. Your character's dead. So aside from sort of the old school die rolling, I think the thing I really enjoy is no one can see in the dark, but the monsters can. And then figuring out where the monsters are lurking. And I think this has happened in both of our games. The players look up and suddenly they're like, because I'm playing online in Roll20, and the player looks up and goes, I can't see anything. My screen's dark. What's going on? I think that's because the rest of the party moved and you weren't paying attention. The torch is over there.
Yep. I had a situation, and I really like this because it has lent a lot of almost creepiness. The players have been more careful when exploring the dungeon, because they know that if the torch goes out or if the lantern goes out, that they can't see, but all the monsters can. And there aren't any magical items. And in fact, the game warns against giving anything that allows people to see in the dark easily. So I had a case where they were fighting a bunch of skeletons that were coming in from the darkness into the torchlight, and because torches only last one real-time hour, and I was playing on Foundry VTT, which keeps track of that for us, they had killed what they didn't know if it was the last skeleton since they were coming out of the darkness, but they had just killed the last skeleton, and the round ended and the torch went out, and so scramble to light the next torch, and hopefully they weren't going to be in a combat while they're doing it.
Yep, we had that too. I think I think I just said the next torch. You light the next torch off of the last torch or whatever. But that was really It's fun. Light as a resource is a great mechanic, and it keeps everybody focused because this is a lunchtime game. We only have an hour. Torches last an hour. So it really, like, we have a little bit of chit chat, but people really enjoy just launching into it and like knowing that torch is burning down. So light as a resource is pretty cool.
Yeah. The last thing I would add to that is it also, there's a section in there for the in GMing is monsters know this. So they'll aim for the torch.
Right.
And there are random encounters, which is a strong wind blows through the dungeon and blows the torch out, or things like that. Basically, things that will hamper the party, not necessarily injure them directly, but it could lead to severe injury.
Yes, definitely.
So our next one in old school D&D and in early D&D, technically it's still there even in 2024 D&D, is encumbrance, but a lot of people just ignore it because it can be cumbersome, honestly. Word choice intentional. But Shadowdark makes it easy. Every piece of gear you carry takes up one or more slots, and you have your strength score or 10, whichever is higher, slots for your gear. Your clothing and a backpack don't take up a slot. Your backpack is basically where you carry everything. But if you have like a really heavy item, that might take 2 slots. 100 coins is a slot. So the thing that has happened many times in the different games we've had is we'll have people that only have like 10 or 11 slots, and they'll only have 1 or 2 open because of like the adventuring gear takes up like 7 slots.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, do I drop rations for this tiara, this treasure that I got over here for this more expensive, possibly treasure over here? You know, like they're trying to figure out how to do it and get as much out of the dungeon as possible. Sometimes they're like, can I drop this here and we return to town to sell the stuff and then come back quickly? You know, and that's part of the game is you can leave the dungeon and come back. And of course, as a GM, you can have the dungeon slightly change in that time. So
new monsters move in.
Woohoo! Yeah, I think if I can find it, there's a restocking the dungeon that somebody put out, and I need to find that again. But we can probably link that in the show notes for this.
Yeah, because we're going to build out a Shadowdark resources page. I've started taking some notes on it as I've been working on my campaign. So our next thing after gear slots is Squishy Heroes, a wizard with 3 hit points. A wizard with 3 hit points. Yeah, that's it. Truly old school D&D. Like,
that's really high. I mean, wizards get what, D6 for hit points in 5th edition for first level plus their con bonus,
something like that. Yeah, 3 is.
And I think basically a lot of people play with you get max hit points at first level. So
yes, although in my campaigns it hasn't mattered.
Wizards in Shadowdark, well, they go back to the D4. So actually, a wizard with 3 hit points is a lot.
Yeah.
Our current wizard has 2, and our thief has 1. So our fighter has 9, and it's a 4-person party, and the fighter has more hit points than the other 3 members combined.
That's pretty awesome. So yeah, Squishy. Yeah. Like I said, I haven't killed many characters yet, but I've also been very careful to like introduce some opportunities for them, like to role play or to problem solve instead of actually getting into a fight. So in the most recent game, there were some hungry wolves that were sniffing around the edge of their fire, and they offered them food. They also tried to attack. One of them tried to attack, which we'll get into in a bit because it was hilarious. But ultimately, they were able to kind of like befriend the wolves a little bit, and the cleric healed one of the wolves who had a broken off shaft of a goblin arrow in his shoulder, and the wolves were like, and then like, ran off. So maybe they'll be back sometime to help them out. I don't know. But like they had a choice whether that they wanted to fight. And it's been really hard for them to not fight.
Yeah.
Because the temptation is strong.
And there is one thing in Shadowdark that I like that removes a little bit of that temptation, which is you don't get XP from combat. So
correct.
If you're not getting XP from combat, you have more incentive to avoid combat and maybe make some friends or at least skirt around it. So the squishy wizard can live a little longer.
Yes.
Skills, there aren't technically any skills in this game. There kind of is, but you don't start with any, and unless it's like written as part of your character. There's no number associated with the skills, like you don't have a number that's separate from your attributes. If you are trying to do something like disarm a trap as a thief, they have a skill that allows them to disarm it, and their skill makes it easier. And I'll get into that in a second. But if it's a lock that they need to get through, they just roll it. It'd be basically a dexterity check to see if they unlock it. But if the lock would prevent the game from continuing, then, and or it's an easy lock, as the rules say, if it's easy, you just do it.
Right.
There's no reason to halt the adventure, bring it to a grinding halt, and go, okay, we've had 4 characters all roll their dexterity checks and none of them can get through the door. Okay, we all go home. You know, there's
That
no
would be
reason
old
to
school.
do that.
I mean, that used to be it.
It would
right?
be
Like,
old school.
failed at unlocking the door.
Yeah.
Well, come back next level.
Yes.
You can try
Well, come
again
back
then.
next level, take an axe to it, do something else with it. And those are all still options here. But, you know, if it's an easy thing to do, like if the wall is an easy climb, you just do it.
Right.
Hard is when you roll.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier with a thief, anything that makes a skill check easier, you just roll with advantage. You don't use this +1, +5, whatever. You just roll it with advantage. And then if it's harder, if the wall is slippery, you roll it with disadvantage. And that's just keeps the game easy to figure out, but also keeps it moving along.
Right. I gotta say, so between this and Mothership and Alien actually both do this, which is basically don't slow the game down by forcing die rolls, right? Like you're assumed to be competent, like you can climb up a rail, a ladder, jump over the railing, whatever. And so I've been doing this with my D&D game too, even more so since playing Shadowdark. It's like, you know what? Like, I mean, people like rolling dice. They like having characters and skills that are good at things. Like that's been a part that my players have enjoyed for a very long time, going all the way back, and particularly with 3rd edition. But that having been said, like you're coming down the road, you see like the unstable cliff face. Like there's some things that are just obvious. I don't have to force perception checks every 5 feet to give you something, which is basically just setting up the narrative to get you to the point where the exciting stuff happens, and then your die roll matters.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to, since you did bring that up with the perception roll, there is no perception. Kind of like in Mothership, there is no sneak. In Shadowdark, there is no perception. One of the things they say is if the thief or if anyone in the party says they're looking for the trap, they find it. You know, it's one of those things where if they're being careful enough to look for the trap, they will find it. If they're not looking for the trap, well, that's on them. But
right.
You know, it's one of those things that, you know, you can just do the perception check. You can just do. And I would say something that I've taken even before Shadowdark, which is if you're going to have a roll, the consequence for failure should not be derailing of the game. It should have some sort of better story consequence for it.
Which is very much a modern attribute, I think, in games, right? Where fail forward. Don't just like say, yep, you lost. The world ends. Yep. So speaking of you've lost, morale, enemies who are reduced to half their number or half their hit points for a solo enemy flee if they fail a DC 15 wisdom check, which, morale is a thing that used to be a much more prominent aspect of D&D back in the day. I remember using it quite a lot. I think 2nd edition probably.
Definitely 2nd. I don't remember it in 3rd, but it definitely in 2nd.
I think it would still have it show up, but as a game mechanic, I think it was actually something that was still like encouraged in 2nd edition, and in 3rd, it kind of fell by the wayside, even if it was actually a rule. I mean, in large groups, you make one check using the leader's wisdom modifier, unless you kill the leader, right? So I think it's a cool concept, right? Because it helps you set up combats where, and if the players know that this is a mechanic, right? So I've been trying to reinforce the areas where Shadowdark is different than what they're used to. They know that they have to wipe out half the goblins, right? Or take out the goblin shaman or what have you. They don't have to win down to the last one, which I think also keeps things moving more quickly. I haven't actually had one of these bigger fights yet, but, if half the people run, then you don't have to fight every last goblin.
Yep. And I think that actually makes things more immersive in some ways, in my opinion, because a lot of D&D fights that I have been in the last while is, it's head to head and last man standing sort of thing. You're going to take them all down or they're going to take you all down. And very rarely have I seen enemies run from a fight. Even rarer players run from a fight. But enemies running from a fight, monsters running from a fight, I don't see. Whereas Shadowdark, they make it easy to do the morale. In early editions of D&D, it was like roll in this table. Different monsters have different morale scores, etc. Now it's just make a wisdom check of DC once you're under half your number or half hit points. The mimic that attacked my party failed its wisdom check, and our party had to take it down the rest of the way. But they were already well on the way to it. But having monsters run away is just kind of more realistic. And also, that means they can come back later.
This is true. So I will say, you say like in D&D they don't run away, but in my last Greyhawk 76 session, they both ran away. The heroes and the attacking the Burrow boys. You guys will be hearing about that on the Greyhawk 76 episode soon. But the Burrow boys set up an ambush, and it was a pitched fight, and like they took out the barbarian, and they like he had like 0 hit points, was dying. Goblins roll him into this mountain stream. So, and I was like playing it. Okay, so like, are you going to do the Western thing where like, okay, so does he die and just bring in a new character because it's a playtest, or does like he does the Western thing where he washes up on the shore and now he's going to come back and be even angrier about the Burrow boys? But like they both retreated. They were both like, yeah, we beat the crap out of each other. Let's call it a draw. And then they both retreated. It was great.
Nice.
But anyway, I would largely agree that it's usually a slugfest last monster or human standing or PC standing.
I forgot where we were.
Spells
I think it's me
can
now.
Kill you.
Yes, spells can kill you. So this kind of comes into our next point, but in order to cast a spell, you have to make a spellcasting check. Doesn't matter if you're a cleric or a wizard. The classes are a lot more condensed. There are a few more later, but it's not like the plethora of classes that you have in D&D. The core book only has 4: wizard, cleric, thief. So wizard or cleric, when you cast a spell, you have to make a spell check, which is, I believe it's 10 plus the tier of the spell. They did correct something from D&D. They didn't call it a level of a spell. So you don't have character level and spell level. You have level for characters and tiers for spells. So a first level spell is, the first tier spell is 11 or better. If you, like with a wizard, wizards can cast magic missile with advantage, and as you're leveling up you can get other things like that allow you to cast certain spells with advantage, but it's just an intelligence check. So if you're trying to cast a 3rd or 4th level spell and you're not a very intelligent wizard, well, that could be a problem. And you could even not just fail to cast a spell, but critically fail to cast a spell. Ken has an interesting story about that one.
Yeah, it was great. So we, in this encounter, my last Shadowdark session, hungry wolves at the edge of the firelight, the half-orc cleric approaches them and is feeding them, food, trying to like befriend them. The goblin wizard wakes up and goes, "Oh, hell no," and then prepares to cast magic missile. Only he fails his check, and he ends up purple, glowing purple. Instead of actually shooting the magic missile off. And at that point, everyone was like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't fight the wolves. So it worked out in the end, because they were kind of on the cusp. Like half the party was like, why are you doing this? They're going to follow us. They're going to kill us later. And then the other half was like, but this is how you get dogs, right? And they ended it. They befriended the wolves, at least for now. So I don't know. They're going to be a recurring character. I haven't figured out quite what to do with them yet, but they are definitely showing up again.
Nice. Related to that is you don't have spell slots. You don't have a number of times you can cast per day. They're unlimited spells, as we have written here. Just keep casting. But you end up risking it. If you fail the spellcasting check, you can no longer cast that spell until there's no short rest, I believe. It's just effectively a long rest if we're going to use 5e parlance. But in order to get that spell back, basically the next day you can get the spell back. If you critically fail and roll badly enough, though, you can get a what was it? It's like a mind wound or something like that. I don't remember the name for it, but you lose that spell for an entire week, which is pretty bad if the spell that your wizard character was casting is a light spell, and they can no longer cast light for an entire week. You're going to be carrying around a lot of torches.
Right.
So, yeah, it's unlimited casting's pretty cool. People out there may have heard of Vancian magic, which is what the early D&D stuff was based on. Basically, you would read and the formula of the spell would implant itself in your brain. And then you'd hold it there. And then when you cast it, that pattern was released from your brain and wipes that spell from your mind. That's why you could only cast the prepared spell that you had once until you prepared it again.
Right.
Here, it's because things are so gritty, having the unlimited spells means that it doesn't turn things into a slog, because what used to happen in early D&D is you'd have a wizard and they would have one of two spells, magic missile or sleep.
I was going to say.
And then they would cast it once and they'd be done. And it'd be like, okay, guys, we need to rest or get the heck out of here because I'm out. And so this helps the first level wizards actually be useful for the entire.
Yeah, we were talking about this on, I think, one of the YouTube comment chains about like the 5-minute workday, right? Like which is, I think, had gotten worse over time with Dungeons and Dragons as you just kept like expending everything and then retreating from the dungeon, resting for 8 hours and then getting it back. So I think 5th edition has made that better with short rests. At least in my campaigns, you're much more likely to not just retreat. But there's also some mechanics in 5th edition that don't allow you to cast all the spells the way that you would have in 3rd. But you know, it's something that Wizards has been fighting with for a long time, like 4th edition. I mean, hate it or love it, that's why you had at-will powers, right?
Right.
And that's why you have cantrips now in 5th edition, because you can just keep casting them. But I like it. I like it's a risk. In my campaign, it was funny. There was this point where the spellcasters were like, why would I choose to cast? Right. Like horrible things would happen. And they all kind of came to the same conclusion of like, well, I guess you cast because you're a wizard or you're a cleric, right? It's kind of what you do.
Right. And that's
they
why
kind of
your
need you to
highest
do
stat. Yeah. That's why you put your highest stat into the intelligence or wisdom at that point. But I like how it's a balance there. You don't have unlimited cantrips. You have unlimited spells with a risk. And so, yeah, if you're on a hot streak, you just fire off magic missiles, light, that spell that I haven't seen used since probably 2nd edition, which is floating disc, or in D&D, Tensor's floating disc. Like in Shadowdark, that's awesome.
Right. It's super powerful. Might be too powerful.
It's 20 slots of stuff. So it's like two full characters worth of, or like 2 full henchmen worth of carrying capacity, and all they're wearing is clothes, sort of thing. It's good. It's a good spell. But yeah, it's a really, I really like the way that the unlimited spells work.
It's very cool. However, there are downsides, right? And so Clerical Penance is another one. If you if you have a critical failure as a cleric, you have to do a penance to your god, and I can't wait for this to happen because I'm doing a Norse inspired campaign, and so there's going to be some fun penances. Penance? What's the plural of penance?
Penances.
Penances.
It sounds weird.
I clearly cannot speak it tonight, but it says inadequate or subversive penance, such as donating your sacrifice to a party member, only displeases your deity further and makes the spell loss permanent, which is awesome. So yeah, I can't wait to see what Odin and Thor and Loki and all your other favorite Norse gods do to my players when they fail.
Yeah, so it's not as detrimental as a mage spell going awry, but it's a little harder to get back. Because not only do you have to rest, but you also have to do the penance.
Yeah, my players are a little worried about the whole penance thing. They're like, wait a minute, you have to do a penance to get back in your god's good graces? Like, yes.
It's not something where you have to go on an epic quest to get a tier 1 spell back.
Right.
They do have a chart in there for example sacrifices of like a 5 gold sacrifice. The equivalent of a 5 gold penance might be, would be enough.
Right.
Maybe going around and helping the poor and feeding the poor in your city might be enough to get the tier 1 spell back.
Right. Which means you might have to leave the dungeon.
Yep. For a little while. Yeah. One of the things that Shadowdark pulls from older D&D that is a little bit gone from more modern D&D. And this has positives and negatives. Basically, we're embracing the random when we're talking about Shadowdark, because a large portion of the Shadowdark book is random tables. Random tables for taverns, random tables for designing a dungeon, random tables for your wandering monsters, all sorts of random tables in there, random tables for wilderness adventuring. And it helps you if you have low prep. It's like, hey, I've got this sketchy outline of what I want to happen in the adventure, but I don't really know what kind of monsters are here, or I don't really know, I don't have a name for somebody. There's a random name table in there.
Right.
So you can depend upon the tables and depend upon the dice and not necessarily have to make a choice in the moment. And there's some good things about that, in addition to the lack of prep, which is it might take the game in a way that you weren't expecting, but then triggers a bunch of creativity in you because it took a turn in that weird direction.
Yes. Yeah. I haven't actually used the tables very much, except I was using the random village generation tables.
Yeah.
Which are fun. And like you get access to additional districts as the village gets bigger, but they haven't gone back to the village yet. So they got to survive the cold north before they can go to a town. So we've been alluding to this, right? So limited rules, maximum improv, right? Stripped down version of 5e removes a lot of the game specific rules, and then improvise when the specific is needed. This has actually been a hard thing for me. I've been going through the rules and just for each section kind of distilling what the Shadowdark rule is, or what the Shadowdark approach is to a particular thing, because my brain is overloaded with 5e. And so being able to understand what they kept and being able to distinguish between the two so that I don't inadvertently fall back on the complexity of 5e, right? Because really what you want to do is fall into the simplicity of Shadowdark, right? Just make it simple.
Yep. And like, I think I have that a little bit luckier because I have not played a ton of 5e over the years. And so I know just enough of the basics that it's easy for me to go, there's no skills. Okay. I can forget about that. You know, it's like, there's no wild magic tables. Oh, there's no spell slots. Okay. I can forget about those things.
And I've been...
they're grappling. Oh yeah. Okay. Just make a strength check.
I've been playing a lot of crunchy games. Like the least crunchy game I play, probably like Savage Worlds, right? And it's still got a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But like Cyberpunk Red, I mean, Fallout is not super crunchy. Check out our newest episodes. But like, you know, I just, as a GM, I tend to run stuff that's a little more complex. And so I have to retrain my brain when running this or running Mothership to be like, no, it's cool. Like keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it.
Yep. What's interesting about that part of it is I've been playing Call of Cthulhu as well. Not to derail things, but like that game isn't super crunchy, and
it's not.
It has actually leads to more investigation and role playing because of it, and I like that. And I think the more I run Shadowdark and the more my players play Shadowdark, I think it's going to lead to more role playing, which I always enjoy.
Yeah.
And as Ken was saying, with the limited rules, the entire rule system can actually fit in your head once you play it enough.
Once you figure out what those rules are, yes.
Yeah, it's like, this looks like a big thick book. You know, in terms of stuff that you really need, it's probably only 50 pages.
That sounds about right.
And then the rest is like pre-spells, mage spells, monsters, and a lot of random tables. And a lot of it is, you know, going back through our other 11 sides of the die, you know, skills, there aren't any. Just it's an attribute roll. See if it fits. Also, if it's easy, don't even roll. You know, so there's a lot of the times that I see and have played 5th edition, it's like, I want to make a perception check to see if I see anything, you know, or I want to make this check. You know, it leads to I want to seduce the drawbridge that comes from Tiny Tina's Wonderland in Borderlands. You know, it's like everything depends on that D20. Here it doesn't. And that's that sort of limited rules that all fit in your head at once. I could run a Shadowdark game without the book. In fact, probably without character sheets, you know, or monsters or whatever, at this point. And I haven't run it very much. I think I've run 5 games total. Now I've run a bunch of other games, so it's a little easier to do that for me. But, you know, it's a lot. I think can you put it as the Goldilocks zone of size?
Yeah, I think that's about right. It's not too light, not too crunchy. You know, you've got some complexity where you want it, and that makes it for a fun, very dynamic game. So I'm looking forward to, I'm going to take my lunchtime game and turn it into a 4-hour game at Mepicon later this spring. So that's going to be super fun. And there's some other things that are coming up with Shadowdark later this month in March. So we'll have to figure out the timing of it. It may be just after this episode comes out based on how we're releasing things. But in any case, there's a Shadowdark, The Western Reaches campaign setting Kickstarter coming, which the teaser page is up. It'll be linked to in the show notes. Once it actually drops, I mean, I think once we get all the cool details about this setting, I think we should do another episode on it. It's basically that the pitch is the Western Reaches are an unexplored land of fragile civilizations, majestic landscapes, and forgotten horrors that lurk in the dark. And then classes you can play are Painted Witch, Armored Knight, Silent Monk, Scarred Pit Fighter, quick-witted explorer, seafaring warrior, and it's meant to be a sandbox setting that is fast, elegant, and flexible in the signature Shadowdark style. And there's a little thumbnail on there that shows like the premium box set's got like, I'm trying to count them, 1, 2, 3, like 7 books in it. So it's like, what? Sorry, I don't want to count while we're doing the podcast.
If I recall, I think there's at least 1 or 2 that are the next zine set. I think there are 3 zines, so it's like 3 zines have been created for Shadowdark already. 1, 2, and 3 add some extra stuff into it, like new monsters, new magic items, new character classes. I think there's an adventure or 2 in one of the zines, basically just adding to the whole thing of Shadowdark. And I think right now, the base thing of Shadowdark is really all you need. Adding all this extra stuff, no, the rules won't fit in your head after a while. But
yeah.
I think this Kickstarter, I believe they're doing 4, 5, and 6 of the zines, and then probably the campaign setting as well.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this. They do call out there's 3 zines, and then there's also, I'm looking at the books now. So there's the Western Reaches Player's Guide, the Western Reaches GM's Guide, City of Masks, Dwellers in the Deep, River of Night, Midnight Sun, Red Sands.
Are those adventures, I think?
I can't make out with the last one. It's like Diabli or something like that. I'm trying to read sideways on my monitor. But anyway, okay. I mean, Midnight Sun was one of the, Midnight Sun was one of the, whatchamacallits, the zines. But these look like books. So I don't know. Maybe she's expanding on the content.
We'll have to check.
We are looking forward to seeing what the new Kickstarter is going to bring, because it sounds pretty cool. I always love more monsters, so give me all the monsters. And I will say we have an unboxing, but it's really just Ken opening his mail of Midnight Sun, which was the third of the Cursed Scroll zines, and it's really, really good. I've been using it for my campaign because again, it's Norse themed, and so it's got a MIDI hex crawl setting. It's got a bunch of new monsters. It's got a whole bunch of Norse specific spells, the lovely random tables and oaths, right? Because in the North, it's not about good and evil. It's about whether or not you can keep your word.
Okay.
Which is cool. And it's something I want to lean into in the campaign. It's like, you're not a question of whether you're lawful evil or not. It's like, you're going to kill the bandit king, not because he's evil, but because he broke his word.
Yeah.
And a man without his word is nothing. So
I would say, if you're at all interested in Shadowdark, download the Quick Start. They have a Quick Start on there that is free. There's a player's guide and a GM's guide. I really like this because it means that you can hand the player's guide to the player, and that's all they really need to know at the time. And then in the GM's guide, there is also a module, which can be very brutal. if you are at all one to want to make sure your characters survive, sometimes Shadowdark might not be the game for you, but the idea of a lot of Shadowdark is the characters have to be careful. So if they're careful, they can probably survive it. If they make allies, they can survive it. I'll tell you right now that when I ran my characters through that, they allied with other people in the dungeon, and that's what allowed them to take down the big boss without any of them dying. So, so it's good to not always kill everything you meet.
This is very true, which is why my wolves are going to come back at some point. Maybe at a very appropriate place, they'll show up and save the party from something horrible.
Thanks.
So anyway, we're always looking for feedback, and you guys have been giving it to us over on YouTube, so we really appreciate that. You can follow us there, like and subscribe, and do all of the things. You can also find us at Dice Camp and, of course, at Lair of Secrets.